that was planned in order to use it towards City Hall, but and that will be brought forward as part of the budget amendments that will come to you in January once we wrap up the whole project budget.
So, I'll let you two sort out who goes next.
I just want to clarify, Mr. Castillo, I think Mr. Castillo was asking about the City Hall public safety improvements. That is a continuation of the current City Hall project, right? So that's saying that the City Hall project is over budget and the public safety improvements have not been made and those still need to be paid for?
I think it's just a characterization of the entire project.
And do you have a sense of how much that is? What the dollar amount that is?
It's going to be, well, we need to settle it out. So I'd rather not discuss it quite yet, partly because the negotiations underway right now as to what.
Okay, so just to be clear, though City Hall is done, it's the public safety aspects of it are not finished and it's coming in over budget?
Yeah, so it's not a new project.
Right, it's not a new project. This is over budget of the City Hall project. Just to be clear.
Now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I clarify a little bit? The City Hall project, its official name is City Hall Public Safety Improvements Project. That's what we have called. And the main reason for the upgrade was
not new money. This is that project coming in much over budget, over what was originally projected, and that's why one-time funds need to be used to finish this project.
That is correct.
correct.
And Ms. Hardy I'm sorry, I don't know who wants to go next?
So while we're doing lots of clarifying, so that again, I think I want to make sure that this point is clear, especially for the press that's listening to this. We do not have $4 million of free money, right? So for FY19, what I heard was say that only kind of amount of free money we had, i.e. increased revenues, was $780,000. The rest was due to underspending and then permit fee revenues and other things that came in. So that's when we didn't hire all the people we thought we needed to hire, and we had department vacancies. So only $800,000 or so was actually increased revenues. Do I have that number right?
Tax revenues.
Tax revenues.
Increased tax revenues.
And then for FY20, we have the 1.7, mainly because we issued debt in November versus April, and then we had a better interest rate. How would you break those down? So how much, because I think what I would call the real money is the better interest rate, where we actually have real savings. Just because we pushed out one debt service doesn't mean we have 29 years worth of debt service. We still have 30 years. We just pushed it out 6 months.
So the capital reserve, that the 2.9 million that came from the capital reserve has been pushed, and the 1.7 is from the better interest rate. So that is the tax dollars, the 1.7 million.
So that's just from the lower interest rate.
Correct.
Thank you. I think a general kind of philosophical question I have is kind of for spending surplus. I think collectively it looks like we have a lot of money to play with, because there certainly are a lot of mouths at the trough, to continue that analogy. There's probably even another 10 items we've gotten requests from various folks beyond the 5 that are up there. But I think I generally have a philosophical concern with spending, underspending from the previous year and using it on new projects when we might have shortchanged various departments in the previous year because we didn't hire all the people we needed to hire. So I think just more of a question for us to think about as we debate the upcoming budget amendment.
I'll go back to school.
I would note that also on the school side, we also did not hire many people and intentionally underspent to make sure that we met budget guidance last year. So we had several positions that went unfilled and that do need to be filled, that we will probably come back again this year and ask for them that we didn't ask for last year.
So I'm sorry, just to follow up on what Mr. Castillo was asking about earlier with regard to the school revenue share, I guess I'm still not quite clear why that's not, I guess, higher on the list in terms of something that we're looking at, because my understanding was that we had a verbal agreement with regard to that. So I'm not really clear, I guess, from your previous answer, where that stands and what we're looking at with regard to the school revenue share. Because that seems like we went through a pretty elaborate process and it's taken us a while to get to that point. So I'm just trying to understand why we would abandon it at this point.
I don't think anybody's saying we should abandon it. This is a staff presentation of Shields, but that's certainly something we can discuss, and I think there is certainly some support, maybe from some, if not all of us, to make sure the schools get a portion of this. But I think the point of clarification was kind of what is the money to play with, or what is the amount that's not slotted for something already. In terms of, for example, like the permit fees, it's always been kind of a lockbox that the permit fees stay to hire inspectors and other things for the additional development that we've got planned, for example, the 10 acres. So I think that's something we should be discussing right now today at this table, but I don't think anything has been decided. That's just the presentation we just heard.
That is not a prioritized list. I think folks are just clarifying that we don't have $4.2 million to split, even in the spirit of the revenue share. It was formulaic in that memorandum of understanding, and I think some of the hesitation from folks is that there was nothing signed on the dotted line. There were a number of us that were involved in drafting that in the spirit, and also verbal agreements. So I think there are some of us that look at that as good as written, but that has not been discussed in consensus at this particular point in time. But again, just to be clear, we're not talking about splitting $4.2 million, nor do we have $4.2 million of free money, as some folks like to look at. Can I ask a couple questions since I have the mic, or do I need to yield back? Is this the back in the ping pong?
I don't know. I think we
Guys
should
are
let our
next.
school board folks go first. There are, I don't know, guests in our room.
So I actually want to stay on the same topic. Thank you, because I was remembering, since I didn't have the paper in front of me, I wanted to go back to the detail. Thank you for all the clarifications. I would very much like to see the breakdown of those top 3 lines, not the potential use of the one-time funds, but the thing that the items that you just explained about the sources of each of those, because I would not munge them together. It seems to me that they're significantly different. If we're delaying funding and the expense is just we're going to pay out of the capital reserve and we're going to repay later, that's one thing. If it is funding that had already been given to the general government to spend, and the general government underspend, for example, because there's a vacancy, that's another thing. That's normally something that you would be programming internally. If it's additional revenue that came in, then that, I mean, I get I just don't understand the envelope for the permit fees, and if that's legally restricted in some way, or we've had a historic practice. I'd like to see it broken down so that I know we're talking about, in terms of funding new things, a much smaller amount than 4.2 million. But it's very hard for me to sort of even engage in that discussion without not just a verbal description of the general buckets, as opposed to seeing in writing what the amounts are, what bucket they came from, and a further discussion of the restrictions around each of those buckets. For example, that permit fees are considered. I've never heard before that there are no lockbox, and that may very well be. I just don't have the background or understanding to make that conclusion. So I in a sense would almost rather not talk about that tonight if we could, because I don't feel like I've got the detail to answer these questions. This is the first time I've seen this.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable request. Maybe we can do that in short order for them.
Yeah, the detailed discussion of this will be in January when we consider a budget amendment. The reason it's presented so starkly like this, and I grant you in some respects it's not a great way to present it because it seems like a big number, but we also just wanted to be respectful of the fact that these are numbers that we're looking at, and we've discussed them with the council before. We're getting money to the hidden, but there is nuance behind it that we're not properly capturing in this.
I know that Ross would like to ask a question, but I've got one on point, and then I'll hold one back because I'm building on something you said, sir. One part of that, and also building on Phil, your comment, right? The spirit and the written down draft of the revenue agreement were very specific about what money was considered to be split, additional revenue above $4 million. So knowing that number and then looking at the formulaic description of that might help dial back a little bit of the stress there, because that would be the spirit.
Dave, do you have a follow-on to that?
So, first of all, a question. I want to go back to slide number 3 for a second. I'm a little bit concerned about these revenue projections because they seem a bit optimistic. It's this, it says the assessed value. It's not that one. It's something that says whatever number you've got, 5. Okay. So I'd like to know more about why we're projecting we're going to do better on residential increase than the city of Alexandria, which is a direct beneficiary of HQ2, or a potential beneficiary, but certainly not as direct as Alexandria and Arlington. So I have some questions about what seem to be surprisingly optimistic, even compared to our neighboring jurisdictions. And that's nothing that needs to be answered tonight, but it's something very relevant as we go forward. Also, I want to point out there's an emergent issue that was mentioned verbally that isn't among the list of issues, and that's the stormwater and sewer, storm sewer work, which is a citywide issue of very significant ramification. So both with respect to that emergent issue as well as the emergent issue of traffic calming, I need a sense about what can we do, when can we do it, and how much it's going to cost in order for revenue planning. These are things that affect the entire city, whether you have people in the schools or not. Both are significant issues. Both are urgent issues. So I'm concerned about those being fully discussed and considered along with the capital, the ramifications of the city hall and the library. Thank you.
All right. So back to slide 5, Kieran. Just to clarify on some of these numbers, the growth that's being projected, is that value of existing stock increasing, or does that include the new construction that's being added to it? Are we talking about the total pie growing because market value is increasing? Are we talking about total pie growing by 3.6%, which includes new construction, which adds to the value? But does that include throwing new construction value into the mix? Okay. All right. So the percentage increases below in Fairfax County, City of Alexandria is at the same apples to apples comparison, where they're looking at increase in value to the existing stock, excluding new construction being added to the mix.
Construction, or market growth. But for Fairfax, they parsed out the residential, the commercial, and the new construction for both residential and commercial separately. We are close to the new construction mark. We're 1.2% of our total pie of 3.6.
So just to be clear, we're expecting, and I'll get to my point here in a second, we're expecting our residential assessment base to grow 3.7, which includes new construction.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. And our market growth net of the new construction is 2.8%.
That's correct.
Okay. And our 3.7 is an apples-to-apples comparison to the 3% in Fairfax County.
That's a blended rate there. The 3% is blended commercial.
Blended because it has not residential in there.
Okay, so 3.7 to the 2.
Right.
3.6 compares to
Yeah.
3.6 is apples to apples.
It's the 3.04.
Both inclusive of new construction.
Exactly. Inclusive of residential, commercial, market growth, as
And our
well as new
residential would
construction.
be 2.8 versus the 2.0. Okay. Yeah. So one point that I want to note, and not to dig back into the auditors, our auditors still here.
No, they're not.
There are really interesting data points in here that Councilman Hardy points out, and I think it's important just to kind of set baseline tone and context of our discussion around budget. There is a reason that this year, and I believe last year and the year before, and possibly the year before that, our market value increase to our assessment base on the residential side, exclusive of new construction, continues to outpace some of our neighbors. And there's a reason for that. It's simple supply demand. Folks want to move to the city of Falls Church. And it's important to recognize the reason that folks want to move into the city of Falls Church